Hello everyone. Tonight, we slip off our sandals and step into the dusty alleys of Mughal, India, where the scent of cardamom clings to the air and marble palaces shimmer just beyond reach. You're not anyone important yet, just a curious, wiry child in Agra ink-stained fingers, and too many questions your voice echoing off sandstone walls as you recite rhymes to alley cats and shopkeepers who barely glance your way. But don't worry. Soon your words will find their way to emperors. Maybe. You live above your father's silk shop, where bolts of saffron and indigo cloth sway in the breeze like prayer flags. Downstairs your father haggles with travelers, his voice half gravel, half charm. Upstairs you're hunched over bits of palm leaf and reused parchment copying verses you heard from a blind street poet 2 weeks ago. Your ink pot is actually crushed berries and soot. Your quill a sharpened twig. This is your secret world, a nest of words tucked between crates of brocade. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city breathes around you. Agra is bustling under Shah Jahan's rule, its heartbeat echoing through crowded bazaars and echoing courtyards. You're just a speck in this grand story, yet already there's something electric in your blood. You know the names of every ghazal master by heart. You whisper their couplets to sleeping pigeons on the roof. And sometimes, when the call to prayer fades and night stretches across the Yamuna River like a silk shawl, you sit with your knees drawn up, humming your own poems into the dark. Your mother, long past, left you a single thing, a chipped ceramic bowl once used for grinding sandalwood paste. You keep your scraps of verse in it, folded tight. It's silly, you know, but you like to think she'd have approved of your scribbles. Maybe she would have even read them. The schoolmaster down the lane thinks you're a nuisance. Poems won't feed you, he mutters as you loiter outside his class trying to peek at a Persian manuscript through the window. He's not wrong, but he's not right either. You're already fed by verse-fed in ways rice never could. One day, while pretending to deliver your father's silks to a noble's home, you slip away through a side door. You're 10, maybe 11, barefoot and bold. What you find inside changes everything. The library smells of rose oil and dust. Hundreds of books, real ones, bound in leather, some with gold-leafed edges, gleam under flickering lamps. You creep through the rows like a mouse in a temple fingertips, brushing spines older than your grandfather. There's a scroll open on a cushion. Rumi. You can't read all of it yet, but enough to know these lines are magic. They hum under your skin. For weeks after you return, careful to blend in with the servant boys when no one's looking. You recite verses under your breath as you sweep hallways and polish lanterns. Some evenings, you don't even take food, just books. You're drunk on metaphors, high on rhythm. You learn quickly. Your Urdu begins to sing. Your Persian grows teeth. You scribble constantly on discarded cloth on palm fronds, once even on the back of your father's tax ledger, which earned you a smack and a week's worth of silent dinners. Here's a funny thing, even as a child you start crafting insults in verse. Not mean ones, clever, cheeky things. Once, when a neighbor's goat knocked over your ink jar, you called it the cloven-hoofed destroyer of art. The phrase spreads like wildfire. Even the local butcher quotes it laughing. Fringe fact court astrologers in the Mughal period often composed poetry between star charts. Some of them even competed in poetry duels. Imagine arguing iambic meter between eclipses. Still, historians debate whether these childhood antics of yours truly mark the beginning of your genius, or if the stories grew in the telling. Maybe you really did sneak into that noble's library. Or maybe you just like to say you did. Either way, it becomes part of your legend. But you're still a nobody in Agra. A sharp-tongued dreamer with smudged clothes and more ink under your fingernails than food in your stomach. The older boys mock your ragged verses. Why don't you write something useful? One sneers. You reply with a limerick about his lopsided turban. You win that round. Then, one festival day, you're perched on a low wall singing a verse about a dancing monkey you saw in the square. Your voice isn't trained, but it carries. A small crowd forms. Among them, a man with a beard so lush it could shelter songbirds. His robe glimmers faintly, not from wealth, but from layers of careful dye. This is a man who knows appearances matter. He chuckles at your punchline, steps forward, and flips a silver coin through the air. You catch it barely. The first money you've ever earned from your words. You don't know it yet, but this man will change your life. You go to sleep that night, clutching the coin, heart hammering like a tabla drum. Somewhere nearby, the Taj Mahal gleams in the moonlight, the emperor's love frozen in marble. But you're just beginning. The court, the capital, the chaos, it's all ahead. But for now, you're still that boy on the rooftop, muttering poems to pigeons, hoping the wind carries your words somewhere they'll matter. The next morning, your father thinks you've stolen the silver coin. You're halfway through your story about the bearded man and the monkey poem when he rolls his eyes and mutters something about daydreams in cheap rhyme. He takes the coin anyway to help pay off a supplier, he says. Fair enough, but it stings. So you double down. You start writing every chance you get after prayers during meals, even while stirring dye vats in your father's shop. You invent couplets in your head while scrubbing silk-rhyming pomegranate with fate and sandalwood with misunderstood. You keep dreaming of libraries, of polished floors, and golden ink, of quiet nooks where nobody calls your work nonsense. Word of your talent starts to travel not far, just around the neighborhood. The spice merchant asks you to write a few lines for his daughter's wedding invitation. The baker gives you a half loaf of sweet bread in exchange for a short ode to his cinnamon buns. You're becoming something new in the streets of Agra, not just a boy with dirty knees and clever comebacks, but a poet. Almost. One monsoon night, as rain drums on the clay roof tiles, the bearded man returns. He introduces himself as Mir Karimullah, a low-level courtier who claims to have an ear for unusual talent. You offer him water, he declines. Instead, he hands you a scroll, your own verse rewritten with better meter and proper Persian inflection. You have a good voice, he says, not unkindly. But no training. You'll need to fix that before Delhi. Delhi, you ask, wide-eyed. He shrugs. The only place a real poet belongs. Agra's for tombs and traders. That line hits hard, because you know he's right. Even as Shah Jahan continues building his glittering legacy, even as the Yamuna flows silver under moonlight, Agra feels like it's closing in on you. Your father's shop smells more like debt than dye these days. Your verses deserve marble halls and silk cushions, not back alleys and borrowed ink. So you begin your self-education. Mir Karimullah doesn't stick around. He drops a few names, mentions a merchant in Delhi who might offer lodging in exchange for evening readings, then vanishes like mist. But he's lit the match. You steal moments in the noble's library again, this time, not just to read, but to copy down entire ghazals in the margins of old receipts. You trade errands for borrowed scrolls. You listen to wandering minstrels with more intensity than any sermon. One day you get lucky. A scholar priest visiting the city leaves behind a battered Persian grammar. It's missing pages, water-stained, and smells like mildew and cloves. But it becomes your holy text. You read it until your eyes blur, sounding out tricky couplets under your breath. Slowly, your vocabulary blooms. Your metaphors grow silkier, more precise. You start to sound like someone who's studied with masters, even though you haven't. Here's a fun little fringe fact. Many Mughal-era poets kept parakeets trained to recite lines of verse. You once try this with a local bird. It bites your ear and refuses to rhyme. Still, you persist. Every city has its own rhythm, and Agra's is growing out of sync with yours. You feel it when you pass the stone steps of the Jama Masjid and realize you're thinking more about rhyme schemes than prayers. You feel it when you overhear visiting soldiers mocking the local poets, calling them festival fakes. You want to shout your lines at them. Instead, you go home and rewrite your favorite couplet 10 times until it glows like fire. Then the day comes. You pack a small bundle, your favorite scraps of verse, a loaf of dried apricot bread, a talisman your mother once wore around her ankle, and exactly 3 rupees, which you may or may not have pinched from your father's ledger. You leave at dawn, not dramatically, just with a quiet goodbye to the pigeon that still perches on your windowsill. The road to Delhi isn't long in distance, but it feels like another world. You walk most of the way dodging bullock carts, priests, and the occasional overly curious monkey. The sky changes as you go. Agra's dust gives way to Delhi's smoky blues. By the time you arrive at the southern gate of Shahjahanabad, your sandals have split at the toes, and your shirt smells like boiled lentils and rainwater. Delhi swallows you whole. The city is loud and glittering and cruel. Nobles ride past in palanquins without seeing you. Scribes laugh in alleys you're too nervous to enter. You sleep in the shadow of the Red Fort for 3 nights, surviving on fried lentils and river water. You finally meet the merchant, Mir Karimullah, mentioned a rotund man with suspicious eyebrows and a fondness for ginger syrup. He lets you stay in a storeroom behind his spice shop in exchange for reciting poems to his customers twice a day. Most of them are too busy haggling to listen. But one evening, a veiled woman lingers. She buys clove and nutmeg. As she leaves, she murmurs, "The second line of your couplet was stronger than the first." Then she disappears into the market crowd. You replay that comment all night. Here's a proper historical anchor during the Mughal period. Delhi was a magnet for artists, mystics, and rebels. Shah Jahan's capital was purpose-built for grandeur, its red sandstone arches humming with ambition. Poets, especially those who could navigate the intricate balance between piety and passion, were courted like rare gems. You're still learning the ropes. You realize quickly that talent alone doesn't open doors. You need connections, patronage, and maybe a bit of luck. But you've made it. Barely. Your stomach growls more often than it's full. You sleep under shelves of turmeric and dried rose petals. But every evening, as the city settles under a blanket of twilight, you light your candle stub and write. The lines come slower now, but deeper. You start seeing poetry, not just in moonlight and lovers, but in market noise and beggars' songs, in the crooked smiles of shopkeepers. Delhi doesn't care who you are, but you're here to make sure it remembers. Delhi is a city that tests your patience and your pride. The red fort looms in the distance, all polished stone and whispering halls. Inside, emperors pass judgment, poets compose on command, and dancers float like smoke across inlaid marble. But out here, where you live behind sacks of pepper and cracked jars of asafoetida, you're nobody. Not yet. But one afternoon, things change. You're sitting cross-legged in the back courtyard of the spice shop, reciting a verse you've rewritten 12 times, trying to make a single image the way a dying star might look if it fell into the Yamuna feel fresh. You barely notice the man at first, the same courtier from Agra Mir Karamula, sipping tamarind water under a frangipani tree. He applauds once, soft, deliberate, then says, "You're still polishing stars, I see." You nod, trying not to beam. They're nearly done. That's how it starts. He offers you a small opportunity. Nothing grand, just a chance to perform at a salon gathering for mid-tier nobles. No payment, of course. But it's your first step into the velvet-draped world you've dreamed of. You bathe in rose water, courtesy of the spice merchant's wife, and borrow a slightly too short sherwani from a generous neighbor. Your stomach churns like a festival drum as you step into the Haveli courtyard, all jasmine garlands and flickering oil lamps. The air is thick with perfume, sandalwood smoke, and tension. You're the youngest there. Everyone else has practiced sneers and names that end in Ula. You, on the other hand, are introduced simply as the boy with a gift for couplets. The host, a portly noble with a drooping mustache, raises one skeptical eyebrow. "Go on then," he says. "Make us weep, or at least yawn politely. You do better than that." You open with a piece about the sound of a monsoon hitting a copper roof, how it resembles lost footsteps. It's risky abstract, not a love poem like they expect. But halfway through, the noble's wife leans forward. By the end, someone claps, and someone else asks for a second. You leave that night walking on air. Someone even tucks a gold paisa into your sleeve, which you later exchange for 3 mangoes and a bar of jaggery. Not a bad trade for 5 minutes of rhyme. And then come the invitations. Small at first. A tea salon here. A noble's daughter's engagement there. You find yourself navigating a strange, glittery maze of perfumed courtyards, embroidered cushions, and endless chai. You learn the politics of flattery, how every couplet must nod to someone's vanity, how every metaphor must hide a name. You sharpen your tongue. You learn to pretend. You also learn that in the Mughal court, poetry isn't just entertainment, it's a weapon. Rival poets try to outshine each other with veiled insults, hidden barbs, and what you'd now call burns in verse. You once hear a couplet so scathing it causes a minor noble to spill his sherbet. Fun, fringe detail, elite salons in Shahjahanabad often held verse battles where poets competed not just for applause but for lavish gifts. A gold ring, a rare book, sometimes even a silk turban. Losing could mean public shame. Winning meant everything. And you start winning. There's a quiet joy in the way your name begins to circulate. You overhear it once in a hammam whispered like a rumor, that young poet, the one who made the vizier's wife blush. It isn't quite true, but in Delhi, truth bends easily when gilded with rhyme. But even as your reputation rises, you stay cautious, because with each room you charm, the stakes get higher. You can feel it in the way older poets scowl when you enter, in the way one of them, a heavy-set man known as Mullah Kamar, accuses you of stealing Persian dreams and calling them your own. You smile bow and reply, "I borrow dreams, Mullah Sahib, but I wake them up." That line sticks. People quote it for weeks. Kamar doesn't speak to you again. still not everything is bright lanterns and whispered praise. You discover the murky waters of patronage. Nobles promise commissions they never pay. One minor prince offers to sponsor your chapbook, only to vanish a week later with your manuscript and your best metaphor about a storm-lit peacock. Historians still argue whether Mughal poets like you were true artists or mere courtiers cloaked in rhyme. Were you crafting beauty for beauty's sake, or just chasing coins, currying favor, performing intellectual theater? You wonder that yourself some nights. But by now, you've figured out something vital. There's power in performance. The way people lean in when you pause before a final line. The silence after a truly perfect couplet. The way words hang in the air charged and fragile like lightning before thunder. It's not just poetry. It's theater. It's politics. It's survival. One evening, you're invited to perform at a minor celebration inside the outer gardens of the Red Fort itself. Not the inner sanctum yet, but close enough that you pass actual guards in jeweled helmets and smell the strange, sweet scent of imperial perfume drifting from upper windows. Your nerves almost get the best of you. Your voice cracks on the second line. You feel sweat pooling behind your knees. But then you spot her, the veiled woman from the spice shop. She nods once. Just once. It's enough. You recite a new piece, one about longing, and lamp oil about the ache of language and the softness of lies. It's the best thing you've written yet, and when you finish, there's a beat of silence so pure it feels like prayer. Then applause. A man steps forward. He introduces himself as Nizam Ali, an advisor to the emperor's personal tutor. He doesn't smile, but he hands you a small scroll. The prince, he says, enjoys clever verse. You try not to shake as you bow. That night, back in your cramped storeroom, you unwrap the scroll. Inside is a formal invitation to recite at the next royal salon. The wax seal is real. The ink smells expensive. You sit on the floor, heart-hammering, staring at the scroll like it might vanish. Outside, Delhi breathes in its endless, crooked rhythm. And you're just getting started. You don't sleep that night. Who would a scroll with the emperor's seal lies open beside your pillow? The flickering flame of a brass oil lamp, casting shadows over the words you've already memorized. You keep reading it, not because you forgot, but because the sheer weight of it feels impossible. Your name scrawled in imperial ink. You, a street boy from Agra, summoned to recite before the prince and his court. You try to write, but your hand trembles. So instead, you walk. Past the silent spice shop, through alleys perfumed with last night's curry, and lingering incense until you reach the edge of the Yamuna. The river glows softly under a ghost of a moon. You whisper a couplet to the water, and for once even the frogs seem to listen. You've always known words have power, but now you're starting to suspect they have wings. In the week before the recitation, everything changes. You're sent a fine tunic, midnight blue with delicate threadwork and a pair of velvet slippers so soft you're almost afraid to wear them. You're brought to a barber who, for the first time in your life, styles your hair into the sort of gentle wave that says, "I am poetry." You're taught how to bow. Not the quick street version, but the slow, shoulder-sweeping arc that shows deference without groveling. The court is a machine of rituals. Every glance, every syllable, every gesture measured and choreographed. You rehearse your lines until your voice grows hoarse. You study the way other poets nod, before beginning how they modulate their tone, how they pace the rhythm of breath between verses. Here's a mainstream fact. Mughal courts, particularly under Shah Jahan, were not just political centers, they were stages. Poetry readings were entertainment, moral guidance, and veiled diplomacy rolled into one. A clever verse could win land. A badly timed metaphor could cost your head. So, no pressure. The day arrives. You're led through a series of colonnades and courtyards, each more opulent than the last. By the time you enter the salon chamber, your knees feel like boiled okra. But you don't stumble. You don't bow too soon. You keep your spine straight. The room hushes. Silk cushions line the marble floor. Gilded mirrors catch lamplight in dizzying bursts. In the center, lounging like a panther on a golden divan, sits the emperor's son. Dara Shikoh, scholar, mystic, rumored heretic, a man who prefers philosophy to conquest, poetry to politics. He gestures. You begin. You open with a ghazal about silence, not absence, but the kind that holds 1,000 unspoken things. Your second piece is sharper, more daring, hinting at the fragility of crowns. You risk it. You see a flicker of something in the prince's eye. When you finish, the room stays still. A bird coos softly in a cage near the balcony. Then Dara Shikoh claps. Once, twice, a third time. You've done it. He doesn't speak to you directly that evening. But the next morning, a royal steward appears at your lodging. You are, it seems, to be retained. An official poet, not yet for the emperor, but for Dara Shikoh's court-in-waiting. You will be paid. You will be housed. You will no longer need to recite for cloves. You move into a modest but elegant room on the palace grounds. It has real windows, a writing desk, a shelf with actual books. You cry when no one's looking. And then something even stranger happens. You start teaching. It begins casually. A noble's son wants help crafting his couplets. Then a court lady asks for guidance in polishing a ghazal. Before long, you're hosting informal workshops under the shade of a neem tree in the palace garden. It's surreal, barefoot children and bejeweled aristocrats alike, hunched over parchment, debating the merits of metaphor. You, the boy who once stole ink, are now the one handing it out. Fringe tidbit, for you some Mughal poets trained their students through riddles and dream interpretation. You try this once, ask your students to describe a cloud using only the senses of smell and touch. The results are hilarious and unexpectedly brilliant. Still, not everything is jasmine-scented joy. There are whispers that you're too young, too bold, too close to the prince, that your verses hide heresy, that you write of love too often and God too little. One evening, a court historian, older, sharp-nosed, and visibly bitter, tells you your work is pretty but unserious. You reply, "What is more serious than beauty, sir?" He doesn't answer, just walks away. Historians still argue whether the poets of Dara Shikoh's circle were innovators or insubordinates. Were they forging a new, more introspective Persianate style, or defying the conservative orthodoxy of the Mughal elite? Your name will one day be in that debate, though. For now, you just want to write without looking over your shoulder. Still, caution creeps in. You begin revising, more trimming anything too sharp, smoothing the edges of your metaphors like river stones. You trade wildness for elegance, passion for polish. And then one day you see her again, the veiled woman. She appears during a reading in the garden, sits near the fountain, and listens without speaking. After everyone leaves, she approaches. "I liked the one about the ruined mosque," she says. You nod. "It was a dream. I barely remember writing it." "Dreams are dangerous," she replies. "Especially yours. You don't ask her name. You never have. But you think about her for days afterward. You write a new piece, your boldest yet. It compares a divine revelation to the sound of her footstep in dry leaves. When you read it aloud at the next salon, someone coughs awkwardly. You're pushing boundaries again. By now, your words are not just heard, they ripple. Nobles commission verses to settle arguments. Ministers quote your lines in court. Even the emperor, it's said, has asked who you are. And somewhere deep in your gut, a flicker of worry begins to glow. Because in a place where poetry is power, and power is always shifting, being noticed can be both a blessing and a curse. You light your oil lamp, you dip your pen, and you keep writing. The walls of the palace are starting to feel tighter. Not because they're any less beautiful. Oh no, they're still covered in filigree and fretwork, and the scent of rose oil still clings to every breeze, but because of what they contain. Eyes, ears, secrets that whisper through latticed windows and rest beneath silver platters. Your words travel farther than you do now. You overhear a stable boy quoting your couplet about a candle dreaming of the sun. A wazir scolds his son by reciting your metaphor about ambition growing too fast like a mango tree that forgets its roots. It's flattering and frightening. You've become more than a poet. You've become a presence. It's here, amid the increasing gravity of your reputation, that your relationship with Darashiko begins to shift. At first, it's subtle. He asks for your opinion on certain passages from mystic texts. You hesitate to answer what do you know of Sufi saints and Sanskrit commentaries, but he insists. You say what you think. He smiles. Then he starts requesting poems not just for salons but for himself. Private pieces, quiet verses, a ghazal about the veil between faiths, a rubaiyat about the sound of the Ganges at dawn. He reads your words and stares at nothing as if they unlock something he's long tried to forget. You don't dare ask, but eventually he tells you. I want to build a bridge, Dara says one night, pacing the moonlit terrace. Between the truths that divide us. Hindu, Muslim, word, silence. And I want the bridge made of poetry. You nod, stunned, flattered, terrified, because you realize this isn't just poetry anymore. This is ideology. This is politics. And in a court balanced on the blade of a jeweled sword, ideology can get people killed. Mainstream fact, Darashiko truly was a bridge builder. He translated Upanishads into Persian-studied Vedanta philosophy and sought to reconcile Sufi Islam with Hindu mysticism. His ideas were radical, his popularity, especially with scholars and poets, deeply troubling to the more orthodox factions of court. And you're quickly being associated with him. There are benefits, sure. You're granted a personal scribe, an elderly man with trembling fingers, and an encyclopedic memory. You're invited to more exclusive gatherings where the carpets are thicker, the wine sweeter, and the silences far more dangerous. You even receive a room upgrade higher up in the palace compound with a sliver of balcony and a view of the river. You write at night with your feet dangling into open air, pretending the sounds of the city below are applause. But there are risks, too. One afternoon, a page boy who used to sneak you extra bread won't meet your eyes. Another poet, a sharp-tongued man named Shabazz, quips during a reading that some bridges are built to be burned. You laugh politely, but your hands clench behind your back. You start to notice who doesn't invite you anymore. Fringe detail, court rivals sometimes dueled with nothing but couplets. Literal duels where each party recited biting verse back and forth until one was declared emotionally slain by the audience. There are rumors one such exchange ended with a fainting fit and a month-long exile. You haven't dueled anyone. Yet. Instead, you channel your unease into your poetry. Your tone darkens. You write about birds flying too close to fire, about shadows dancing under burning trees. You never mention Dara by name, but anyone paying attention sees the thread. The metaphors get heavier. People call them mature. You call them survival. Historians still argue whether your more symbolic verses from this time were deliberate political commentary or simply reflections of a stressed young poet caught in the prince's ideological orbit. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. You certainly never confess. And then the rumor hits. Aurangzeb, Dara's brother, the general, the ascetic, the one with eyes like cold steel, is returning to Delhi. And not just for a visit. He's gathering support, whispering sermons, meeting with clerics in shadowed prayer halls. The court begins to fracture. You see it in the thinning smiles, the way invitations start to come with disclaimers, the sudden popularity of more traditional poets whose verses echo Quranic imagery and leave no room for ambiguity. You find yourself performing less, writing more, and then you're summoned, not by Dara, by the emperor. You're escorted through quieter corridors past fountains and guards with hollow eyes to a small chamber with walls of blue and ivory. There, slumped in a cushioned chair, sits Shah Jahan, the man who built the Taj Mahal, the man whose hands once carved justice from marble. He looks tired, old. His eyes drift as if trying to focus on a memory just out of reach. He gestures for you to speak. You recite a piece about light, how it bends through water, changes color, loses clarity, but gains depth. It's the best you can offer. When you finish, he sighs. Poets, he murmurs. We are all prisoners of metaphor. He doesn't say more. You're dismissed gently, kindly. But you leave shaken, because you've now seen the empire's beating heart, and it's not made of stone. It's made of grief. That night you climb to your balcony. Delhi sprawls below like a dream interrupted. Somewhere out there, Aurangzeb gathers sermons like weapons. Somewhere inside the palace, Dara dreams of unity. And you pick up your pen. Because no matter which brother wins, the only thing you truly own is your next line. You wake to the sound of drums. Not the rhythmic, celebratory kind, those have a swing to them, a joy, but the heavy, deliberate kind that sound like thunder in chains. From your window, you see a procession winding through the palace grounds. Men in armor, scholars with bowed heads, monks with silent mouths. Aurangzeb has arrived. You get the news not from a steward or royal courier, but from a fellow poet, Shahbaz, of course, who now smiles with the slow satisfaction of someone who just saw a fox enter the henhouse. His Highness Dara, he says with a little too much emphasis, has a rival again. It's going to be a fascinating month, no. You try to laugh. You don't succeed. Suddenly, all your poems feel like secrets waiting to be decoded. At court, the shift is immediate. The prince's mystic salons are quieter. The laughter is thinner. You find yourself scanning rooms more carefully. You stop writing in the garden. That neem tree that once sheltered dreams now feels like a stage exposed to too many eyes. Mainstream fact. The rivalry between Dara Shikoh and Aurangzeb was as much philosophical as it was political. Dara represented a pluralistic, Sufi-influenced view of Islam. Aurangzeb, a stricter Orthodox interpretation. Their visions for the empire were incompatible, and you, whether you like it or not, are drifting dangerously close to one side. You start spending more time alone. You take long walks by the Yamuna, scribbling half-verses and burning them in little clay lamps. You write poems backwards, read them aloud in mirrors as if trying to trick fate. And one night in the middle of all this, she returns. The veiled woman. You don't hear her arrive, she's just suddenly there beside the fountain hands folded over a scroll. She watches you a long time before speaking. You're writing with fear now, she says. You don't deny it. Good, she adds. Fear means you're paying attention. You sit together in silence, not romantic, not tense, just quiet in a way only two people who understand each other's stakes can be. She finally hands you the scroll. It's a poem, yours, copied by hand, annotated in the margins. You don't recognize the handwriting, but you know the tone. It's sharp, thoughtful, reverent. Someone has been studying you. Who you start to ask. She cuts you off. People are watching. Not just me. And just like that, she's gone again. Fringe tidbit Mughal. Women, especially those in the imperial harem, were often highly educated and deeply engaged in the arts. Some were patrons of libraries, others secret authors of famous works. Your mystery woman might not just be a court observer, she could be a scholar, a princess, a spy. The possibilities keep you up that night. Things continue to tighten at court. You attend fewer salons. You're no longer called to recite on feast nights. Rumors swirl that Aurangzeb has expressed disapproval of your style too ambiguous, too emotional, too close to Dara. One morning, a small scroll is slid under your door. It's unsigned, sealed with a lotus. Inside is a single couplet. When fire walks in silence, the candle must choose to flicker low or burn with truth. It's beautiful. And terrifying. And definitely not meant for public eyes. You hide it in your ink jar. Historians still argue whether Dara's court was infiltrated at this point, if Aurangzeb had spies among the poets, musicians, even eunuchs of the palace. There's no proof, but proof in this world is often irrelevant. Perception is reality. Then one evening, you're summoned to Dara's private chamber. It's not ceremonial. No robes, no servants, just you the prince and 2 cups of sweetened milk steaming between you. He looks tired. His eyes, usually so full of restless brightness, are distant, like they're already gazing toward exile. I want you to write something, he says. You nod, instinctively reaching for your inkstone. No, he adds. Not now. For later. For a day when I may not be here. You freeze. He smiles, sad and soft. I may win. I may not. Either way, my words should remain. And I want them to sound like yours. You don't know how to respond. Part of you wants to beg him to fight harder. Another part wants to pack and run before the swords start singing. Instead, you just say, "What should it be about unity?" he whispers. And loss. You write the next day in a fever. 3 pages. No corrections. The poem pours out of you like prophecy. You write of empires built from borrowed sand of gods meeting beneath banyan trees of brothers whose names echo like prayers in a stone hallway. You deliver it sealed. You never ask where it goes. After that, you're not seen for a week. You claim illness. Truth is, you're hiding. You know the tide is turning. One by one, you watch old friends choose silence. Some shave their beards. Some change their style of greeting. Some, like Shahbaz, start reciting odes to imperial discipline. You avoid all of them. And then the city changes again. The drums return this time accompanied by cannon fire in the distance. Armies are moving. Cities are falling. A civil war is unfolding before your eyes, and you're a poet with no army, just a pen, and the favor of a prince who may not live to see next spring. You write one final piece. You don't show it to anyone. You hide it inside your mattress. The last line reads, "Let the history books forget my name, but let my verse stain every silence." You don't know it yet, but that poem will survive you. Just barely. There's no more denying it now. The war has arrived not just in the cities and battlefields, but in the very bones of the palace. You feel it in how the courtiers speak if they speak at all, how even the fountains seem quieter, as if the marble itself is waiting to see who wins. You stay indoors. Mostly. Your days blur together in a fog of ink and footsteps. You hear more swords than flutes now and fewer birds. Once a peacock danced in the garden outside your window. Now the only feathers you see are in plumes, black, stiff military. You learn to write without sound. Every time someone knocks, your heart leaps up into your throat like a startled deer. Even a knock from a servant could mean everything. A summons, a rebuke, a trap. You've heard stories of poets simply vanishing from their chambers. Mainstream historical fact. When the Mughal War of Succession began around 1657, it turned vicious very quickly. 4 brothers, Dara Shikoh, Aurangzeb, Shah Shuja, and Murad Bakhsh fought each other for control of the empire. It wasn't polite court intrigue anymore. It was executions, betrayals, and marching elephants. You receive a secret note from your scribe one morning. Just 4 words, they're coming for him. You burn the paper immediately, heart pounding. There's no need to ask who they are, and no need to ask who him is. You already know. You look out your window trying to glimpse the river, but the smoke from the city chokes the horizon. That used to be a symbol of peace to you, didn't it? The Yamuna winding through Delhi like a silver thread sewing faith and fate together. Now it's just another road soldiers can follow. That night you do something bold. You seek out the veiled woman. You go to the garden near the abandoned well just before dusk, where you've seen her pass once or twice before. You sit and wait. Hours, maybe. Long enough for the moon to rise and the bats to start their frantic zigzag flight. Then soft footsteps. She appears. No words, just presence. You speak first this time. Why are you still here? She tilts her head. Why are you... You can't answer that, so you ask the thing that's been burning in your chest for weeks. Is he going to die? She doesn't flinch, doesn't soften. Maybe. You close your eyes. I don't know where to go, you admit. Then stay, she says, but don't expect safety. And again, she's gone. You're really starting to hate how she does that. Fringe tidbit. Some Mughal poets developed entire personal codes, hidden symbols, metaphors, even page-folding systems to communicate covertly. Their verses were layered with meanings that changed depending on who read them. You begin doing this yourself. A red pomegranate now means betrayal. A caged parrot is cowardice. A rainstorm, bloodshed. You stop attending the court entirely. Too dangerous. Instead, you pass your poems along through intermediaries, servants, minor scholars, old friends who still owe you favors. But one day, a soldier appears at your door. Not to arrest you. Not to silence you. To deliver a letter. It's from Dara. No seal. Just a smudge of ash where the wax should be. You unfold it with trembling fingers. My friend. If I die, remember what we tried to build. Let the words survive, even if I do not. DS. You don't cry. You do something worse. You start writing again. Not timidly, not cautiously. You return to the fire. You write verses that would make a cleric's beard curl. Lines about emperors drowning in their own crowns. Stanzas about moons eclipsed by jealous suns. You sign them all anonymously. You let them leak into the market, the mosques, the barracks. Historians still argue whether these revolutionary verses were actually yours. They match your style, your rhythm, your favorite imagery, but you never claimed them, and no one caught you, which is frankly impressive. Then the city goes silent. No music, no markets, no prayers ringing from minarets, just smoke and the clatter of boots on marble. The battle is over. Dara has lost. They bring him back in chains. You don't go to see him not because you're a coward, though, let's face it, maybe a little, but because you can't bear to. You hear whispers that he looks older now, frail, as if the hope has been burned out of him and replaced with dust. You do, however, send him a poem, smuggled through a eunuch loyal to his cause, folded small, sealed with oil to keep the ink from running. It's short, just 4 lines. The wind does not beg the tree for roots. The flame does not apologize to the moth. If the sun must fall beneath the sea, let it do so in gold. You never find out if he reads it. Shortly after Aurangzeb is declared emperor. You learn this not from a proclamation, but from the silence that follows. Suddenly, everyone is very, very polite. People who once joked about power now bow twice before speaking. And poets. Poets disappear. Some flee. Some are exiled. Some are invited to reform their styles, and you know exactly what that means. You receive a single letter. No signature, no address. Just a sentence you may keep your tongue if you forget how to use it. You sleep with a blade under your pillow that night. It's small, dull, decorative really. But it helps. The veiled woman never comes again. You assume she's either dead or pretending not to exist. Probably both. And you stop writing. Not because you want to, because you must. Because every ink blot now feels like blood. You spend the next year becoming invisible, not in a poetic way, not metaphorically. You quite literally stop being seen. You move to the quiet wing of the palace where the roof leaks and the walls groan. You dress in colors so faded they're mistaken for the walls themselves. You stop attending gatherings, stop eating in public. You grow your beard long, your voice quiet, and your footsteps softer than a breath. You even stop speaking in rhyme. It's self-preservation because Aurangzeb's court is not one for lyricism. Not anymore. Mainstream historical fact. Under Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire took on a visibly different tone. Music was banned at court. Many libraries were shuttered, and scholars were encouraged to focus on orthodox religious texts rather than secular or syncretic philosophies. It was a clean sweep, and the poets were often the first casualties. You hear things. One poet, Amir Jalal, is accused of heresy, vanishes. Another is exiled to Gujarat. A third, publicly flogged. For a sonnet, not even a good one. The worst part, Shahbaz thrives. He adapts, instantly turns from wine-soaked ghazals to stern qasidas praising the emperor's divine mandate. His words turn stiff, upright, humorless. Somehow, this wins him favor. He's promoted. Given a room with fresh cushions and lemon trees outside the window, you avoid him. Fringe tidbit. There's evidence that some Mughal poets under Aurangzeb hid their verses inside legal texts. Imagine that poems smuggled between fatwa footnotes, hiding under layers of jurisprudence. You try this once copying a verse into a religious scroll disguising metaphors as parables. You hide it behind a cabinet in the mosque library. You never return for it. One morning, a page finds you. Not Shahbaz. Not a servant. Just a boy with no shoes and eyes too old for his age. He holds out a slip of paper folded into a triangle. You open it. It's a poem. Not yours, not Dara's, but it knows you. You, who once sang stars into jars, are now a shadow sipping silence. The ink misses your fingers. Come back. You sit down. Right there, on the cold marble floor. You laugh. Not loudly, just enough for your ribs to remember what breath feels like. Someone still remembers. So you write. Not for the court, not for glory, but for survival. You write in code. You write under names that aren't yours. Old lovers, minor deities, broken clocks. You slip poems under market stalls into empty books beneath mosque steps. You teach an illiterate vendor a verse just so he'll repeat it out loud every morning. You are a ghost planting flowers. Historians still argue whether this wave of anonymous verse that cropped up in Delhi during Aurangzeb's early reign was the work of multiple poets or one prolific rebel. Some claimed it was a network. Others whispered about the ink sleeper, a single hand behind it all. You don't confirm or deny. You also start translating Sufi texts, quietly, discreetly. You meet with one blind dervish every Friday afternoon, and together you rework old Persian lines into Hindavi, so the local weavers and potters can understand. You watch people weep when they hear your words, but you never tell them they're yours. And one day, because fate loves a twist, you get summoned. Back to court. You consider running, but to where you're too well known to disappear completely, and too stubborn to beg. So you go. The new court is colder. Less silk, more stone. Less perfume, more paper. Clerks everywhere. Men in dark robes, eyes sharp as scimitars. You don't see art, or music, or mischief. Just rows and rows of rule. Aurangzeb doesn't speak to you directly. One of his scribes does. We have reviewed your earlier work, he says. Some pieces are acceptable, others less so. You nod, mouth dry. We are commissioning a set of verses praising the righteousness of law. You will contribute. It is not a question. You bow. Then he adds with a sneer, of course, any deviations from orthodoxy will be corrected. You leave shaking. You write the verses. Carefully, cleanly. They are dull, obedient, and deliberately mediocre. Like boiled cabbage in couplet form. They're accepted. You are paid in grain. You feed it to birds. And then another letter arrives. Same triangular fold. Same boy. Fire cannot be uncooked. The burn remembers. Are you still pretending? Or do you breathe? You start leaving messages, short ones, hidden under leaves behind bricks carved into almond shells, little scraps of defiance. Some get answered. One even returns with a second verse added. Who is this person? You suspect it's the veiled woman, but she hasn't appeared in years. You even dream of her now, and then her voice echoing through corridors of your mind like a forgotten song. But in the waking world, nothing. Then, in a dry season when the air tastes of ash, something unexpected happens. A minor prince sympathetic to Dara's memory invites you to a secret gathering. An underground salon, small, careful, hidden in the wine cellar of a ruined mansion. You attend. There are 6 of you. 7, counting the flute player with no tongue. You read your old poem aloud. The one with the sun falling into the sea. They know it. They quote it back to you. And for the first time in a long, long time you feel alive. You return home that night with a smile buried in your beard. Not a grin, not a laugh. Just that faint, flickering smile of someone who remembered briefly what it feels like to matter. You keep it hidden from the guards, from the courtiers, from the dark hallway, with its yawning silence. But it's there. A smuggled emotion. Contraband joy. Because in that ruined wine cellar something happened. You saw poetry breathe again. You heard your words in other people's mouths. You saw tears and laughter rise at the same line. You remembered that art, even underground, even under threat, still glows in the dark. Mainstream historical fact. During Aurangzeb's reign, despite crackdowns on unorthodox culture, secret literary salons and Sufi gatherings continued in quiet corners of the empire. Some even flourished underground, protected by sympathetic nobles or powerful patrons who enjoyed poetry more than power. You attend again, and again. Soon, the gatherings become ritual every moonless Friday, after the last call to prayer behind the cracked fountain at the edge of Shah Jahanabad. You're no longer just a guest. You're the centerpiece, the masked poet, the ink sleeper. They've started calling you that. At first, you resisted. But one evening, a young woman with eyes like monsoon sky asks you to sign her palm with a line from your poem. You do it. Right there. She closes her hand like she's holding treasure. You stop resisting. Your words spread again. Not publicly, not through court, but through whispers, performances, ink scraped into the undersides of leaves. A weaver in Agra hums your rhymes as he dyes cloth. A midwife in Lahore repeats your metaphors to lull babies asleep. Your poems return to the mouths of the people. And one night you find a poem on your pillow. You don't hear anyone enter. You check the door, it's bolted. You check the window, too narrow, but there it is, folded into the shape of a lotus blossom. You unfold it carefully. You've returned to fire, yet do not burn. What are you made of? And when do I meet you again? No signature, no name, but the handwriting, it's hers. You know it. You barely sleep. Fringe tidbit. The veiled woman, if she was real, and you're still not 100% sure, was part of a rumored resistance network led by former scholars and artists aligned with Darashiko's mystical ideals. They used coded messages, hand fans, and even embroidery to share secrets. Some believe they even rescued manuscripts before Aurangzeb's censors could burn them. You start following signs. A red thread tied to a fig branch. A jasmine petal inside a library book. You're being led somewhere. And honestly, it's kind of thrilling. Like a treasure hunt, except instead of gold, the prize is truth. One night, the clues lead you to the edge of Delhi to the ruins of an old stepwell. It's half-collapsed, moonlit, haunted-looking. You descend slowly, your footsteps echoing. She's waiting. Same veil, same quiet eyes. But something's different. There's weariness now. Her voice when she speaks is quieter than the water below. You're writing again. I am. And speaking again. Only to those who listen. She smiles beneath her veil. You don't need to see it to know. You feel it like sunrise on skin. There's more, she says. There are others. She's not just a dream. She's a messenger. She tells you about scattered pockets of resistance, artists and musicians painting behind false walls, philosophers disguised as beggars, a calligrapher in Varanasi hiding Dara's original manuscripts beneath temple tiles. You're not alone. You should come with me, she says, where your words are wanted. You hesitate, because you've built your silence into armor. You've grown used to being unnoticed. You've learned how to survive by shrinking. And now she's asking you to expand again, to shine again. Why me, you ask? Because people remember the stars that go out, she says, but they follow the ones that come back. Historians still argue whether there really was a coordinated cultural rebellion during Aurangzeb's reign, or whether it was more of a scattered organic pushback by the artistic class. No manifestos survive. No centralized leadership was ever documented. But the poetry from this period, raw, vivid, defiant, tells its own story. You don't decide that night. You return home, sit with the poem she left, and just exist for a while. You listen to the wind, to the creaking of the ceiling, to the slow drip of water outside your window. You don't write. Not yet. Instead, you walk through the streets of Delhi, past the spice sellers and cobblers and the old man who always falls asleep standing, past the children who now chant verses that sound suspiciously like yours. You visit the fountain near the abandoned well. You leave no message. Just sit and breathe. You see Shahbaz one more time. He's standing in the courtyard dictating something to a clerk flanked by guards. He looks diminished, not older, not weaker, just hollow, like a song that lost its rhythm. He sees you, nods politely. Too politely. You nod back, then walk on, because now the words are calling you from beyond this city, and you're starting to feel bold enough to follow. You leave Delhi on a Tuesday. No grand farewells, no luggage-laden caravan, just a plain brown horse, a dusty satchel, and a folded poem tucked under your robe like a pulse. The veiled woman gives you a final nod at the city gate. Not a wave, not a goodbye, just that nod part, blessing part dare. And so you ride. South, then east, through wheat fields and mango groves, past riverbeds where children wave and old men squint trying to place your face. You hum to the rhythm of hoofbeats, make up verses to count the hours, and let the wind erase the last 2 decades from your bones. Mainstream historical fact. During Aurangzeb's later reign as his empire expanded, but his court grew colder. Many artists and poets dispersed across the subcontinent, embedding themselves in smaller courts, rural shrines, and regional centers of learning. Culture didn't die, it scattered. Your first stop is Burhanpur. It's a quiet town now, all crumbling arches and dust-heavy roses. But beneath the silence, something stirs. A scholar there, blind in one eye, teaches secret classes on Persian mystic poetry. You sit in his circle under a banyan tree, trading verses like playing cards. One day, he slips you a worn scroll. It's Dara's commentary on the Upanishads, the very one you thought lost. You don't cry exactly, but your throat does something uncomfortable. You kiss the margin like it's a beloved's hand. The scholar grins. You were his, he says. I can tell. You ride on. In the Deccan, you find a widow who paints verses into fabric, tiny looping lines stitched inside floral borders. Her work hangs in the market mistaken for simple embroidery. You recognize your own poem disguised in silk. She laughs when you ask. I heard it from a potter, she says. Who heard it from a barber, who heard it from a boy with no shoes. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, your poems are used as lullabies, but not the sad ones, the rebellious ones. Imagine that. Babies falling asleep to metaphors about empires crumbling and kings forgetting how to feel. You ride west. In Gujarat, you stay with a bookseller who collects banned texts. He serves tea in cracked porcelain and shelves every manuscript behind false panels. One night he lets you read a handwritten treatise titled The Flame in the Ink. You recognize lines lifted from your early court verses. You point them out. I always wondered if the poet was still alive, the man says. You don't answer, but you smile. Historians still argue whether this mid-reign period saw a cultural resurgence or simply a network of underground art fueled by nostalgia. Some call it the Mughal underground. Others call it folklore. But the verses, they're real. Ink doesn't lie. You keep writing. On tree bark, on fly leaves. On the inside of a clay pot you hand off to a traveler heading north. Your new poems are shorter, sharper, less dreamy, more defiant, less night sky, more lightning bolt, but always with a little wit tucked in because even rebels deserve a giggle. one line you particularly enjoy. A tyrant is just a bored poet with no metaphors. It spreads like wildfire. You hear it in 4 different dialects by the time you reach Hyderabad. There, you meet a Sufi singer with no teeth but the voice of a morning peacock. He doesn't read, doesn't write, but he sings your poems perfectly. You ask him how. They remember themselves, he says. I just opened my mouth. One night, under lanterns shaped like mango leaves, a gathering is held in your honor. You sit, masked, hooded, pretending you're just another dusty traveler. But they know. They all know. Someone reads your old ghazal about Dara's eyes. You almost walk out. But then, someone else barely 20 soft-spoken offers a sequel. A new verse honoring not just Dara, but the fire that followed. And, for once, you don't flinch at hearing your past. You feel full. That night you write something new, something bold. A qasida, yes, but twisted into praise not of kings, but of the people who carried your verses on their backs. The tailor, the dervish, the boy with no shoes. It ends with O empire of cracked mouths and open palms. You were never marble. You were always breath. You leave it at the threshold of a village shrine. Let the wind take it. Some days you still miss the old court, the cushions, the midnight debates, Dara's laugh, Shabaz's jealous glances. You wonder if the river behind the palace still runs red in spring. You wonder if the peach trees still bloom. You also wonder what became of Shabaz. Rumor says he writes court edicts now, in perfect soulless Persian. No rhyme, no metaphor, just obedience. You, on the other hand, you've become a myth. Children play guessing games about who you really are. A merchant swears you're a ghost. A monk says you never existed at all. A drunk soldier once claimed you were actually 3 poets sharing one robe. You find it hilarious. You're not offended. Because what matters isn't who you are. It's that your words live. That they travel by wind, by fire, by rice sacks and gossip. That somewhere someone you'll never meet is whispering a line you wrote under threat of death. And maybe they're smiling. You wake one morning in a sugarcane field with dew on your lashes and a beetle crawling across your knee. It's been weeks since you last saw a town, maybe more. The sun's already high, and your horse is long gone, having taken an early retirement in the last village. You stretch yawn, and try to remember the dream you had. Something about a jeweled bird and Dara whispering verses into a clay pot. You decide not to overanalyze it. You're heading north again. Words reached you, whispers, mostly of a Mughal prince who secretly hosts poetry nights beneath a ruined fort. A descendant of Akbar, supposedly. Liberal-minded, bookish, and bored stiff by court politics. Your kind of rebel. So, naturally, you're curious. Mainstream historical fact. Even during Aurangzeb's strictest period, various family members and nobles continued to host quiet literary events. Some, like Prince Azam, were known to be culturally inclined, despite the emperor's disapproval. The Mughal family was vast, and not all of them followed the imperial script. You reach the fort one evening just after dusk. It's not exactly what you pictured, more bat colony than bastion of culture. But there's music echoing through the crumbling arches, and that's a promising start. You're waved in by a servant with a knowing smirk. Apparently, the ink sleeper travels faster than fire. Inside, the gathering has already begun. Lanterns cast golden shadows on ancient stone. Carpets have been laid, cushions placed, and sweet cardamom tea flows like gossip. The prince, a soft-faced man with amused eyebrows, greets you like an old friend, even though you've never met. We grew up on your poems, he says. Most of them weren't meant for children, you mutter. He laughs. Then thank heaven for poor parenting. You stay a week, maybe 2. Time turns syrupy. Each night, poetry, new voices, fresh rhythms. A woman from Kabul reciting in Pashto. A scholar from Bengal who can rhyme in 5 languages. A boy from Sindh who turns your ghazals into haunting songs, his voice rising like smoke in the vaulted chamber. One night, the prince presents something unexpected, a poem he has written. About you. It's called The Poet Who Didn't Die. It's clumsy, over-admiring, maybe a little too obsessed with metaphors involving birds, but it's honest. And something in you breaks open just a little. Quirky tidbit. That fort, long after the fall of the Mughals, becomes a favorite haunt for Bollywood directors filming period dramas. But they have no idea that a real resistance poet once slept where their camera rigs now stand. You eventually move on, not because you're bored, but because the road calls louder than applause. You were never meant to stay in palaces, ruined or not. You start traveling by foot again, avoiding main roads, stopping in dusty towns with names you forget by the next dawn. But the verses keep coming. Sometimes they're yours, sometimes they're not. You hear a 6-year-old recite a line that could only have come from a poem you burned 20 years ago. You hear a beggar woman turn your metaphors into riddles for coins. You find your work carved into a banyan tree. Not scratched, carved. Carefully, like a blessing. You don't know who did it, but you touch the bark like it's a friend. Historians still argue whether this phase of your life, the wandering sage period as they call it, was real or romanticized. Some suggest multiple poets were folded into your legend. Others believe you orchestrated the myth, deliberately choosing disappearance as a form of resistance. You chuckle at that. If only they knew how little planning went into any of it. In the foothills of Kumaon, you find the woman again. Yes, her. Still veiled, still unreadable, but older now, or maybe just more tired. She sits by a shrine to a forgotten goddess feeding grains to pigeons. She doesn't seem surprised to see you. It took you long enough, she says. You sit beside her. You always leave without saying goodbye. You reply. She shrugs. I never promised I wouldn't. You talk, quietly, long pauses. Some silences are full meals. You learn she's been archiving, gathering the scattered poems, collecting copies, even rewriting what's been lost. She shows you a bundle, rolled scrolls, frayed papers, fabric scraps, bark strips. You wrote all this, you ask. No, she says. But you did. You blink. It's your work, rescued, translated, adapted. Some you forgot. Some were mere drafts. Some were never meant for daylight. You kept them. Someone had to. You reach for a verse scrawled in charcoal on faded silk. They crushed my voice, but not the echo. You don't remember writing it, but it's yours. You spend the night there, sleeping beside the shrine, the wind humming through the trees like a lullaby. You wake to birds and the woman is gone again, but she's left something behind, a stitched packet of poems, with a new one signed in her hand. This time it's about you. Not the myth, not the rebel, but the man. You cry, just a little. Then you rise, brush the leaves from your robe, and begin walking again, toward what you don't know. But you have a new verse forming behind your teeth, and that's enough. You make it as far as Mathura before your knees give out. It's not dramatic, no poetic collapse in the rain. No whispered line about destiny before you faint. Just a slow, undignified bend, a curse under your breath, and you sitting there on a stone step rubbing your legs like an old washerman. The truth is, you are getting older. You can still out-talk any scholar, still compose a castle in the time it takes to boil tea, but your joints crack like dry twigs, and your teeth have started muttering among themselves. You pause longer when walking uphill. You sleep harder. You forget the third couplet sometimes. But Mathura welcomes you. The temples sing with light, the alleys smell like butter and ash, and the Yamuna River still flows like it's whispering someone's secrets. You find a guest house run by a half-blind Brahmin who overcharges you in good humor. He doesn't care who you are. You like that. There's a group of local poets who meet every full moon at a ruined Jain monastery. You join them. They're younger, funnier. They write verses about sandal sellers and goat herders and argue over whether mangoes deserve more metaphors than rain. You contribute sparingly, at first just one or two couplets, always under a different name. But you can't help yourself. Eventually, you drop a signature phrase, one of those sly little constructions that only you ever used. They all freeze. Wait. You smirk? Go on, say it. Are you? You shrug. Depends who's asking. They laugh. Applause ripples out like pond water. They call you Ustad, now master. You try to wave it off, but there's a warmth in the name you can't resist. One of the youngest, a boy no older than 16, asks to apprentice under you. You say no, then yes, then no again. Finally, you just start correcting his meter, and the arrangement settles itself. Mainstream historical fact. In late Mughal India, oral poetry circles called mushairas flourished even under repression. These weren't always grand gatherings. Many were tucked into homes, courtyards, or abandoned sites like the one you found here, functioning as schools' resistance cells and community memory banks all at once. You begin to feel rooted, not trapped, just still. You keep a small garden. You write in the mornings. You teach in the afternoons. You even start taking notes on birdsong, trying to convert chirps into poetic meters. One particularly annoying squirrel becomes your nemesis, interrupting every perfect line with its chittering mockery. You swear it's possessed. Your apprentice tries to write a marcia, an elegy for Dara. It's clumsy and full of overwrought grief, but it's honest. You correct a few lines, add a stanza, and suggest cutting the part with the fire-eyed horse. Too much, he asks. Even tragedy needs editing, you reply. Quirky tidbit. One of your oldest couplets ends up carved into the base of a temple bell. No one knows how. Devotees ring it every morning, not realizing the words honor a prince who defied orthodoxy and was executed for it. You find that irony delicious. There's a girl in the town who sells dyed cloth. She memorizes your verses faster than your apprentice does. You suspect she's smarter than all of you, but she has no patience for metaphors about dead empires. I like the ones about bread, she says. Or that one where you rhyme sandal with scandal. That was funny. You start writing more humor. Quiet humor. Slice-of-life couplets. Observations about cows with personality disorders, monks who snore through debates, parrots that critique your rhymes by screeching off-key. People love them. Historians still argue whether your final phase was a retreat or a victory. Did you fade quietly to preserve your legacy, or did you reshape your art to fit a smaller world, finding peace in obscurity? No one agrees, but those who read the Mathura poems as they're later dubbed tend to say the same thing: he sounds happy. You write one more qasida. This one's for Dara, but not for his crown, his mind, or even his courage. It's for his laughter. You remember it vividly. The way it started low and rose in layers like birds taking off. You describe it as a river that knew its own current, a fire that didn't need burning. The final couplet reads, I forget the empire, the wars, the pain, but not the echo of his laugh in rain. You seal it. You don't share it. Not yet. You write more. Not just poems. Letters. Riddles. Miniature fables. You begin a strange little text that mixes astronomy, culinary tips, and metaphor lessons. You call it The Sky Inside the Spoon. No one understands it. That's fine. You're not writing for fame anymore. You're writing because you're breathing. One evening, as the sky turns copper and the temple bells hum, a messenger arrives. He carries no name, just a scroll. You open it. Read. It's from Shabazz. You haven't thought of him in years. It's brief, formal, apologetic without ever saying sorry. I have retired. The court is quiet. Your words outlived us all. Be well. You stare at the letter for a long time. Then you roll it up, feed it to the fire, and watch it curl into ash. That chapter's over. Now, here's something funny. There's a new poet in town. Young. Fierce. All bone and cheekbones and stubborn pride. Writes verses that make nobles uncomfortable. Smiles like they know something you don't. They approach you after a gathering. Are you really him? They ask. You nod. They hesitate. Then I want to be better than you. You smile. Good, you say. That's the point. You begin to sense it, not fear, not sadness, just a kind of soft uncoiling. Like a ribbon slipping from a scroll. There's no single moment where you realize your time is winding down. It's gradual. You forget a couplet mid-recitation. Your eyes blur in candlelight. You try to describe the scent of jasmine, and for once, no metaphor comes. You laugh at yourself. Even language needs rest, but you keep moving. Not far now. Day trips. River walks. You visit shrines that once loomed in childhood stories, only to find them nestled between chai stalls and goat pens. You sit beside old friends, some living, some stone, and remember aloud. You make your way to Agra just once more. Not for the court, not for nostalgia, but for the river. The Yamuna looks different now. Shallower, grayer. But the arches of the old red fort still glint in the evening, and if you squint just right, you can almost see him Dara pacing, reading, lifting a hand mid-verse. You stand there silently reciting a line he once loved. One you never wrote down. I was born to vanish, not to kneel. A boatman offers you a ride for 1 coin and a song. You hum an old melody from your childhood, one your mother used to sing while peeling onions. He doesn't recognize it, but rows anyway. Mainstream historical fact. In the twilight of the Mughal dynasty, the city of Agra began its slow descent from political center to historical relic. The Yamuna's banks eroded marble faded, and the poets moved east to Awadh, or Lucknow. But even as power shifted, the river remained a witness. Back in Mathura, things continue. Your apprentice is writing far too confidently now, somewhere between flattery and imitation. You tease him for being a walking footnote to your style. But I'm building on what you began, he insists. So is mildew, you reply. The cloth cellar girl, older now with sharper wit, brings you guavas in the afternoons and keeps a notebook hidden beneath her shawl. You sneak a peek one day. It's filled with short, brutal poems. One compares a marriage proposal to being handed a very polite sword. You're impressed, and slightly afraid. You finally share the sky inside the spoon. Only with them. They read it in pieces, furrowed brows, giggles between lines. It's not understood, but it's loved. The way riddles are, or stars. Quirky tidbit. One of your riddles becomes so popular that generations later, it's attributed to a local saint and painted above a tea shop. The original answer is an ink pot, but the shopkeeper insists it's love. You let him win. You start giving things away. The lacquered pen you stole from Dara's desk. A shawl once embroidered by the veiled woman. Your original manuscript weathered and rewritten so many times it's more patchwork than poem goes to a scribe with shaking hands and a lifelong stammer. He can't read it aloud, but he traces each word like it's sacred. You write one final riddle. I eat memory. I wear silence. I vanish without dying. You leave it unsigned. Historians still argue whether the riddle of vanishing was your farewell. Some say it appeared only after your death. Others insist it was part of your final public recitation. The answer, they agree, is time. But a few contrarians claim it was regret. No one really knows. One morning you wake and the birdsong feels different. Not louder, not softer, just final. You eat half a mango, write half a couplet, then lie down. Not to sleep, just to listen. No dramatic last breath. No audience. No great storm. Just the sound of wind through the cracked shutter and someone downstairs boiling tea. You don't leave a will. You don't need to. Your apprentice becomes a teacher. The girl with the guavas publishes her poems under your old pen name, confusing scholars for generations. The boy from the Mushaira now runs a school where laughter and metaphor share equal weight. Your verses echo in places you never visited. Deserts, valleys, tiny islands where your name is mispronounced, but your rhymes are memorized. A shepherd in the Deccan sings your lullaby to quiet his flock. A dancer in Multan tattoos one of your verses into the hem of her sari. And one day, decades later, a British archaeologist finds a single couplet carved into the wall of a ruined caravanserai. Even forgotten I rhyme. Even buried I burn. He writes it in his notebook. Then he turns the page. You're not quite gone. Not yet. Not really, because weirdly enough you're still showing up in places you never stepped foot in. Some kind of quiet resurrection through rumor and rhyme. You become a legend in your absence. A name that shifts depending on who's speaking it. In the port city of Surat, sailors chant your couplets to time their rowing. They swear it helps with rhythm and bad luck. In the far north, near the chill of Kashmir, a baker claims his grandfather met you, and that you once paid for bread with a poem. He recites it to customers. It ends with the line, "This crust like kings will crumble." You never wrote that line, but you wish you had. Meanwhile, in Delhi, the court limps along. Shahbaz is long retired, perhaps buried in some marble tomb, with a verse or two of his own etched somewhere discreet. The emperors now wear more British starch than silk. Every few years another war breaks out like a cough in the body politic. But no one really rules anymore, not fully. The Mughal Empire, once sprawling like a golden peacock, is now a taxidermied bird in an English glass cabinet. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 18th century, Mughal emperors retained little more than ceremonial power, with real authority controlled by the British East India Company. The court still functioned, but more like an exhibit than a government, its poetry now ghosted by colonial politics. And yet your name persists. Old scribes mention you. Young poets misquote you. Even British scholars trawling through dusty Persian manuscripts occasionally pause on your verses and scratch their bearded chins. Curious fellow one says in a letter, possibly fictional, quirky tidbit. A confused colonial linguist once mistranslates your phrase for moonlit grief as cheese of silver sorrow. The phrase ends up in a published anthology. For years, some poor university students believe you invented a metaphor involving dairy-based sadness. You begin to exist in layers. First, as memory. For those who knew you loved you debated you in real time. Then, as story. The apprentices, the merchants, the young girl with ink-stained fingers, they pass you down in scraps and parables. You become the punchline to jokes and the moral of cautionary tales. You're the one who told a prince the truth, the one who walked away, the one who laughed last. Eventually, you become archive. A scholar, let's call him Mir Hamid, stumbles across your work in a disintegrating ledger in Lucknow. He doesn't recognize the signature at first, but the tone unmistakable. He's hooked. Hamid is not particularly well-funded. His coat is always dusty, and he drinks too much clove tea. But he has that mad gleam of someone who knows. Over the next decade, he travels by ox-cart riverboat, and once infamously a stolen horse collecting everything with your name, or even a faint whiff of your style. He finds 14 authenticated poems, 6 more disputed, 3 riddles, 2 elegies, 1 strange recipe for almond soup that he insists contains a hidden metaphor about spiritual hunger. He publishes a slim volume, The Vanished Voice Poems from a Forgotten Mughal. It sells terribly, but it reaches the right hands. A painter in Bengal reads it, and bases an entire exhibition on your lines. A theater troupe adapts your riddles into a puppet play. A rebellious student at Aligarh University tattoos your most defiant couplet onto his arm in secret. It reads, "I bowed to no throne, so I became one." Historians still argue whether you were ever meant to be rediscovered. Was your obscurity intentional? A final poetic flourish? Or just the sad, slow erosion of empire swallowing everyone whole? Some say your reemergence is proof of the endurance of art. Others claim it's coincidence. A few radical theorists even say you never existed at all, that your poems are a composite of many forgotten voices. Let them argue, because somewhere in a modern city, maybe Karachi, maybe Delhi, maybe Queens, someone plays a YouTube video that starts with, "Hey guys, tonight we..." And it's your story. You're the voice behind the fan's hum, the whisper in the dim room. You immortalized in pixels and narrated through gentle cadence, brushing sleep across the brow of someone born centuries after you vanished. Not bad for a court dropout. You don't have a mausoleum. No grand marble dome. No sandstone arches. But that's fine. Your tomb is in syllables, in verses carved into hearts, tucked into song lyrics, half remembered by uncles who swear they once heard them in the bazaar. The boy you taught in Mathura. He grows old, starts calling himself a forgotten poet. That makes you laugh wherever you are. The cloth seller girl, she moves to Benares, opens a press, and publishes anonymous collections of resistance poetry. One of them dedicated to you. It simply reads, "For the one who walked away so we knew we could." You're not a monument. You're a rumor. And in this world drifting, digitized and half asleep, that might be the most enduring kind of presence. You're still lingering like the last note of a song long after the instrument has gone quiet. The strange thing is, now that you're gone, people begin inventing ways you must have lived. New poems appear under your name, suspiciously modern in style. A tavern song makes the rounds in Peshawar, claiming you once seduced a queen with a riddle about mangoes. Unlikely, but you appreciate the flair. Someone paints your imagined likeness. Twice. One portrait shows you as thin, brooding turban slipping sideways like a poet in crisis. The other has you plump grinning with ink-stained fingers and mango pulp on your beard. Neither is accurate. Both are true. You become a metaphor for all poets too clever to survive their own eras. Mainstream historical fact. In the 19th century, Indian and British scholars began cataloging Mughal-era literature, often reshaping legacies based on colonial tastes. Poets who didn't fit neat categories, Sufi enough, royal enough, tragic enough, were either ignored or reinvented. You're reinvented. The British label you a minor mystic. The Persians claim you were a pupil of Rumi's style off by a few centuries, but sure. A German academic decides your riddles are coded anti-colonial resistance, even though you died before the first uniformed boot hit Delhi. Still, you endure. A sleepy librarian in Lahore finds your poem about birds nesting in the ribs of forgotten kings. She reads it aloud during a blackout. Everyone in the room goes still. In Hyderabad, a rapper samples your verse in a protest track. It goes viral. Your voice now pulses under drums, electric fuzz, and chanting. People who've never read Persian are humming your lines in traffic. The irony, you never wanted to be famous. Not like this. Quirky tidbit. A soap company in Lucknow names their new rosewater bar after you, poet's skin. The packaging includes one of your verses heavily misquoted, promising eternal youth. It's scented with jasmine and confusion. Meanwhile, scholars keep digging. A weathered scroll surfaces in a private library in Isfahan. It contains a riddle eerily like yours. What waits, watches, wears you, and leaves you whittled. They debate authenticity for years. Is it yours? Is it stolen? Is it just coincidence? Historians still argue whether you had a final unpublished collection. Some believe the sky inside the spoon was incomplete. Others whisper of an unfinished series of riddles so complex they could only be solved by the passage of time itself. A few fringe theorists say you encoded your entire life story across different poems like a verbal treasure map. One British PhD student spends 6 years trying to decode it. He ends up with an untranslatable phrase that could mean either folded silence or cooked parrot. He weeps quietly. But for everyone else, your story becomes a bedtime hum. In classrooms, you're mentioned in the same breath as the greats, but always with a qualifier. Obscure, unorthodox, a court misfit. You like that one? Your poems find their way into wedding vows and funeral prayers, into secret crush notes and angry declarations. A bakery scrawls your couplets on their wall in icing. You're eaten, remembered, and misattributed in equal measure. At one point, a Bollywood director plans a film about you. It's full of slow-motion horse rides and improbable romance. You're played by a very handsome actor who doesn't blink enough to be believable. The project is shelved when the production runs out of money and the scriptwriter realizes you never actually did anything action-worthy. He rewrites you as a spy. You roll your eyes from wherever you're floating. But the idea is out there now, your life as a symbol. As shadow. The misfit court poet who walked away. More and more you're summoned in whispers. A dissident in exile quotes you in a court defense. A teacher in Lahore ends every semester with your final riddle asking students to write their own answers. A grandmother in Kolkata hums your lullaby to a child not knowing where she first heard it. You exist now not on paper, but in tone, in cadence, in breath, the fabric of memory woven by voices you'll never meet. and perhaps the most poetic part of it all. Most of the people who love your work have no idea you were real. They think you're myth, or metaphor, or maybe just a name added to something beautiful long after the original author was gone. You'd approve, because you always preferred echoes to applause. Your story continues not in ink, but in retelling. Each version slightly different. Each listener reshaping you a little, making you younger, older, wiser, more foolish. But always with that same glint. That quiet refusal to kneel. By now your life is a mirror room, reflections upon reflections no longer clear where the original begins. You've entered the territory of legend. Your name, once forgotten, is now softly famous in the way obscure saints or lost recipes are passed around. Mispronounced, misremembered, but adored nonetheless. In Lucknow, where courtyards echo with old music, a fading, noble family hosts secret literary salons. Candlelight flickers. Sweet pan is passed around. A white-haired woman with rings on every finger recites your verses with a whisper meant to sound scandalous. She swears your words once made a prince cry. You probably didn't, but she wants to believe it, and so you let her. Your riddle about what sleeps inside a bowl but dreams like a king has now been attributed to 5 different poets and 1 Sufi mystic. It's even been engraved on a limited edition teacup. You're not sure whether to laugh or applaud. Mainstream historical fact. In the 19th century, as the Mughal Empire fell fully into British control and the court system collapsed, cities like Lucknow became cultural sanctuaries, breeding grounds for poetry, dance music, and storytelling. Many Mughal traditions lived on there, albeit transformed. You live on, too transformed. The Cloth Seller Girls Press in Benares. It publishes a 3rd anonymous volume that includes several of your rediscovered couplets, plus 5 newly forged ones that are so convincing, even the academics start to fold. Quirky Tidbit, a collector, finds an old math exercise book in Bhopal with your lines scribbled in the margins. Among equations and ink smudges, one reads, "What counts cannot be counted. What's counted forgets how to feel." It's unclear if it's yours. It's also unclear if the student ever passed math. Every year someone new stumbles onto you. A street artist in Pune paints a mural of your most quoted line. "Even buried I burn." She doesn't know who wrote it, just that it hit her at the right time after a breakup, or maybe after the country's latest heartbreak. A cafe in Rawalpindi names a drink after you, the forgotten poet. It's oversteeped chai with cardamom and a slightly bitter finish. Comes with a biscuit stamped with your supposed initials. A podcast host in Chicago includes one of your couplets in an episode on resistance literature. He says your work predicted the modern world. That's generous. You mostly predicted mango seasons and minor heartbreaks. But sure, take the credit. Historians still argue whether you were ever meant to matter this much. Some say your fame now is projection, that modern readers need someone like you, not a towering genius, not a saint, not a martyr. Just a sharp-eyed, quietly rebellious voice that refused to suck up to power and still wrote about small, lovely things. Others argue you're merely a convenient myth, easy to shape, easier to sell. Meanwhile, in some dusty academic office, a scholar types, though largely forgotten in his lifetime, the poet's subversive spirit now resonates deeply with modern audiences, especially in post-colonial discourse. You roll your eyes. You never once used the word discourse. But still, you're grateful, because the stories you told, the rhymes you sharpened, the metaphors you teased out of almond peels and moonlight, they're alive now. Not embalmed in dusty anthologies, but muttered in bedrooms, painted on walls, shouted at protests. Even in places that no longer remember the empire that birthed you, they remember your voice. Your apprentice's students call you Ustad-i-Saz, the master of melancholy. Not bad for someone who once rhymed blister with minister. Some school teachers assign your riddles to 13-year-olds. Most of them don't get the answers. Some do. In a Karachi bookshop, a father buys a slim volume titled Poems for When the Light Flickers. He flips through. Page 14, your verse. What's lost when silence speaks? Only what pride refuses to hear. He buys it. Doesn't tell anyone it made him tear up. A little girl on the Delhi metro reads your words from her mother's phone and whispers, "I like this poet." He sounds like he didn't care if people clapped. Exactly. Because applause fades. But whispers, they travel. Especially at night. You are becoming something else now, not just a poet, but a kind of compass. A quiet suggestion that it's okay to walk away from power. Okay to love the margins. Okay to write about fruit and longing instead of war. And here's the truly strange part. You never intended to be timeless. You just didn't want to lie. And that honesty, that small, unpolished truth, it ripples. Not loud, but lasting. Like a pebble in a still pool, the circles widening long after anyone remembers who threw the stone. You are no longer just a poet who lived during the fall of the Mughals. You are the fall, the flutter, the echo. By now, your ghost walks more confidently than you ever did. You've become a silhouette on the cultural skyline, blurry but distinct. Like a distant hill whose shape becomes more mythic the less it's visited. No plaque, no biography in school books. Just lines. Lines and whispers, and ink-smudged memory. There's a stage play about you in Lahore. It opens with a single flickering candle, and your voice, well, someone pretending to be your voice delivering one of your lesser-known riddles. The audience leans in. A few yawn. One person sobs softly, clutching the program like scripture. You're not sure the actor even read your work, but you admire his cheekbones. Mainstream historical fact. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, India witnessed a cultural revival in response to colonial domination. Forgotten figures, poets, saints, rebels, were resurrected as emblems of resistance or artistic pride, regardless of how historically accurate the retellings were. And so you're drafted into a new war, one you never enlisted in. You're quoted at student rallies, painted across walls next to slogans. One art collective begins selling screen-printed shirts with your face on them. Except, it's not your face. It's a heavily filtered image of a 17th century Persian scholar. Doesn't matter. You wear the borrowed identity like a shawl. Quirky tidbit, in Mumbai, a young YouTuber hosts a Poet Reacts series. One episode features her tearfully reacting to your line "Even mirrors lie if held long enough." Except again, not actually yours. She cries anyway. Historians still argue whether the recent surge in your popularity is genuine reverence or just aesthetic nostalgia. A few professors suggest you've become a meme before your time, relatable, repostable, slightly sad. A new biography surfaces The Rebel Quill. It's 300 pages long, full of sweeping guesses and dramatic fiction. It claims you once saved a concubine from execution by composing a single haiku. You never wrote haikus. But who's checking a podcast series titled Ghosts of the Court does a 3-part special on you. The host describes you as the poet who walked through fire and came out softer. You like that line. It's better than the truth, honestly. The truth being, you mostly walked away from bureaucracy and into semi-obscurity with blisters and a grudge against peacocks. But now, as your story ripples wider, people stop asking for the facts. They want the feeling. They want the image of someone who didn't sell out, who didn't flatter kings, who saw the empire unraveling and decided to step aside and write riddles instead of proclamations. And so you are reinvented again, not just as a poet, but as a choice, a way of being, a quiet alternative to ambition. You become shorthand for rebellion without noise, for artistry without applause. Your lines start showing up in unusual places, the margins of philosophy textbooks, graffiti scrawled on cracked colonial walls, a soft toy for children stitched with your face again, wrong face, and a tag that reads, "Say what matters. Leave the rest." A little heavy for a toy. But the stitching is nice. Your oldest surviving riddle appears as a final exam question in a college course on Persian literature. The professor encourages students to write their own answers, not the original solution, but what they feel it might mean today. Out of 20 answers, none are correct. All are beautiful. A young girl writes, "The answer is grief," because it fits every season and wears your name in silence. You sit with that one a while. The boy from Mathura, your former apprentice, he's long gone, of course, but one of his descendants now curates an archive of radical poetry. In the digital gallery's Unsung Voices wing, you have a folder, a humble one. Inside it, 12 authenticated verses, 9 disputed 4 riddles, 2 apocryphal lullabies, and a scanned receipt from a deli chai stall attributed to you that simply reads, "Paid in rhyme." They're not sure if it's real, but they love it anyway. You, the poet who walked away, are now the poet who returns again and again through other people's stories, through other people's words. And isn't that a kind of immortality? Not the cold, stony kind with statues and streets named after you. No, your kind of legacy is more slippery, more alive. It flows. It's folded into the tongue of a child reciting your lines as a bedtime prayer. It hides in the footnote of a critic who insists you were underrated. It echoes in the voice of someone across the world who's never even been to India, softly murmuring one of your verses before sleep, because it made them feel less alone. There's something almost laughably poetic about your trajectory from court jester to exile to ghost to icon, albeit an underground one. No throne, no tomb, just words, and the soft ripple they leave. You've become a presence in people's lives now, not just as a poet, but as an idea that slips through closed windows and settles in quiet rooms. The world's louder than ever. Cities flash and flicker. Phones hum constantly. But somewhere in the middle of all that noise, someone pulls open a drawer and finds a paper scrap with your riddle scribbled on it. They read it again, even though they've read it before. What tastes of endings but leaves your tongue sweet? They still don't know the answer, but they keep the scrap. And that's how you live now, folded into the modern moment, strangely at home, despite having missed several centuries of chaos. Mainstream historical fact. In post-partition South Asia, there was an intense effort to reclaim cultural identity. Forgotten poets, especially those writing in Urdu and Persian, were rescued from oblivion not by academics at first, but by singers, dramatists, and street performers who carried those voices into the present. You're one of those voices. You're sung in qawwalis, whispered in modern ghazals, and even used as subtitles in indie films. A director in Dhaka includes your couplet during a breakup scene. I offered silence, and still it was too loud. Viewers rewind the moment. Some cry. One writes it in permanent marker on the back of their guitar. In a little shop in Srinagar, there's a wall entirely covered in post-it notes. Each one has a poem or riddle. Most are anonymous. A few bear your name. Some misattribute your work to someone else. The shopkeeper doesn't mind. People bring what speaks to them, she says. Does it matter who wrote it first? You might have once said yes. Now you're not so sure. Quirky Tidbit, a social media influencer, tries to launch a mystic aesthetic brand, using your quotes on everything: pillows, scented candles, tote bags. One candle is called Dust of the Court. Smells like sandalwood and vague regret. Sales spike when she posts a video reading your riddle over lofi beats. You smirk. You never even liked sandalwood. Historians still argue whether your influence is accidental or designed. Could you have predicted this soft resurrection? Did you plant seeds you knew would outlive you? They dig for coded meanings. They suggest your riddle structures mirror sacred geometries or lost mathematical principles. One paper insists you were secretly a numerologist. Another says you were just very tired. Now your words float across generations like invisible string threading together people who've never met, who may never even know your name properly, but still carry your rhythms in their chest. A teenage boy in Rawalpindi prints your quote on a sticker and slaps it on his school locker. If you rush, you miss the secret hidden in stillness. A grandmother in Amritsar begins every story with one of your riddles. Her grandson thinks she makes them up. She smiles, but never corrects him. A translator in Istanbul stumbles across a fragment of yours in a 19th century footnote. She spends weeks tracing it. Eventually, she finds your name scribbled in faded ink beside a Persian transcription. She publishes it with the footnote, author unknown, or perhaps too known to name. You've become something rare, a poet whose mystery is part of his meaning. Not because your life was hidden, but because your afterlife is so rich, so interwoven with others' dreams that untangling you now would be like trying to separate a thread from the wind. You're a question mark in elegant calligraphy, a faded line that still makes people pause. And that pause. That's where you live, because that's what you always wanted, not a throne, not applause, not your face on teacups, but to make people stop just for a breath and feel something they weren't expecting. A little loneliness, a flicker of recognition, a slow smile. Even now, centuries later, you're doing it. People in noisy cities fall silent for a second when they hear one of your lines. They look up from their screens. They whisper it aloud. They wonder about you, not just what you wrote, but what you saw, what you walked away from, and what you left behind. And that wondering, it echoes. Quietly, constantly. You've become less a poet now, and more a pause in the world's speeding rhythm. A hush between stanzas, a breath before sleep. You never sought legacy. You never asked to be remembered. You just wrote what was true for you. And yet here you are, on the tongues of strangers, on crumpled notes, in candlelight, in static, in silence. You've arrived in the strangest of places where the living myth begins to feel more solid than the life ever was. You, the forgotten court poet, now shape more lives than you ever touched when you were breathing. You drift across languages, appear in lyrics, sneak into college essays and late-night texts. People whisper your lines to themselves, thinking they've found something secret. And maybe they have. In the alleys of Hyderabad, A woman paints verses on her sari hems, your verses. She's never read your biography, never heard of your court exile. But your line, "Let no thread go unwritten," felt like something she'd been waiting to hear. Mainstream historical fact. In recent decades, there's been a revival of Urdu calligraphy, with artists embracing classical poetry not only as language, but as visual art. Forgotten poets have become fonts literally printed in bold, sweeping loops on posters and mugs. Yours is among them. You're stylized now. Your name sometimes appears in glittering Nastaliq script, other times in pixelated neon. And still, the message slips through as quiet and soft as ever and tender. Tell the truth, resist when needed. A high school teacher in Lucknow assigns your riddles as journal prompts. Her students don't always get them, but one writes in the margin, "I don't know the answer, but it sounds like how it feels to lose someone. You nod wherever you are." Quirky Tidbit, a small indie band in Bangalore, samples one of your couplets in a track called Drowned Lanterns. Their music video includes a puppet version of you dancing awkwardly through a crumbling palace. It's strange, beautiful, vaguely tragic. You'd have approved especially the part where the puppet drinks tea with a sparrow. Historians still argue whether the poems attributed to you now can all truly be yours. They debate whether you were a lone genius, a symbol of quiet rebellion, or just a convenient ghost to hang modern longings on. They debate. You drift. Your words are no longer bounded by authorship. They've entered the public bloodstream part mantra, part meme, part memory. Someone sets one of your riddles to music. A soft electronic melody builds behind a recitation of what flickers in fire but lives longer in ash. Thousands stream it at night to fall asleep. You chuckle. You never thought you'd be used for meditation playlists. But maybe it fits. After all, you've always existed at the edge of sleep, half a step out of time, your lines a low hum in the dark. A university stages a poetry slam called Verses in Exile. You're on the flyer, just your name in cursive no bio. The MC quotes your line, "When they told me to bow, I bent sideways just to see the stars." That one was yours. Definitely. In a little print shop in Lahore, a man stumbles across an old press plate. He doesn't know what it is at first, but as he cleans the rust, he sees your lines emerging in reverse. He's not a scholar, just a printer. But he starts reproducing it anyway, stamping it onto handmade paper, and tucking the prints inside books as surprise gifts. People begin calling it the ghost poem. You grin. That's your favorite nickname so far. You're everywhere now. But not in the grand statue on a pedestal way. More like dandelion seeds. You settle in unexpected places. You show up on a chalkboard in a Mumbai cafe, on a fridge magnet in Kathmandu, in a whispered prayer in a refugee camp. Someone in Toronto has your verse tattooed on their forearm. The echo is the real voice. They don't know who you were, but they say it reminds them to speak softly and listen more. You, who once feared being erased, are now impossible to pin down. Your afterlife is a constellation, small scattered lights across different skies, slowly forming patterns people swear they've seen before. It's no longer about whether the stories are accurate. You've outgrown biography. Now you're legend, a lantern lit by others, and still lighting others. You've reached the place you never dared imagine, not a resting point, but a soft dissolve into something wider, something woven. Your words are no longer lines, they're breaths. Threads in a language older than empires. They appear in lullabies and resistance chants in lovers' quarrels whispered under street lamps. They pass between people like secrets too beautiful to keep. In the end, it wasn't the emperors or scholars who carried you forward. It was the quiet ones, the scribblers, the daydreamers, the almost poets. Your poems live in them now. Mainstream historical fact, oral traditions in South Asia have preserved countless literary voices that might otherwise have vanished. Entire lives, entire philosophies survive, not because they were written down, but because someone told someone else a story, a line, a moment that stayed. You're part of that river now, not the boat, but the current. A little girl in Karachi uses one of your riddles as a password for her secret club. What travels faster than thought and leaves no shadow? She doesn't know the answer either. That's the fun. A retired bookseller in Delhi finds one of your couplets folded into an old ledger. He doesn't remember writing it, but when he reads it, he smiles like he's greeting an old friend. In a rooftop cafe in Istanbul, a group of students discuss one of your stanzas between sips of bitter coffee. One says it's about heartbreak. Another insists it's about political disobedience. The third just shrugs and says, "It makes me feel seen." You like that answer best. Quirky tidbit. A sleep app adds a whispers from forgotten poets setting. One voice reads your verse in a barely audible tone over the sound of rainfall. Users call it soul floss. It becomes oddly popular. Historians still argue whether this moment, this sudden ubiquity of your words marks your true arrival into literary canon or just a particularly poetic fad. They write essays. You drift through dreams. You've become a quiet rebellion, a softened echo against the empire's harsh clang. You, who once watched emperors fall, are now the last thing they left standing. Not because you conquered, but because you cared. Because you wrote what others dared not say, not with a shout, but with a whisper. And in a world full of noise, the whisper wins. And now, here you are at the edge of sleep. The court has gone silent. The scrolls are rolled. The ink has dried. Your journey from a nervous boy with a head full of rhymes to a spectral whisper echoing through the ages has settled into something softer. Not closure exactly, but peace. The palace is long gone. The empire crumbled, but a child still hums your verse under their breath walking barefoot through a courtyard of jasmine. Somewhere, someone reads your riddle aloud, then pauses, letting the silence answer. You live there in that hush, in that breath before the world returns. Your footsteps have been folded into the dust, but your voice, gentle, sly, patient, still lingers like candlelight on old marble. Soft, steady, undeniably there. And isn't that the most lasting legacy? Not gold, not monuments, but a feeling someone can't quite name that tugs at their chest when they hear your words. You've become the low hum under the world's song. So now, let the fan spin quietly. Let the room dim just a bit more. Let that soft rustle of blankets be the final turning page. You don't need to chase the story anymore. It found you. It held you. And it will carry you on. Sleep now, poet. You've earned your echo.